My dad moved into a house in the middle of the woods about 2 years ago, and I moved in with him soon after to help him get around and take care of the house and whatnot. Side note, it's an old house in the South, on land that Native Americans heavily inhabited. Honestly, this house is really weird. The first night I spent here, I was woken up by a woman whispering, "Is anyone home?" right next to me as I was about to fall asleep. My dad didn't believe me when I told him the next day. It's taken a while to get used to living in the deep woods, but something about this property is off. There's been more than a few times where I've actually felt a heavy presence, almost like someone is standing right behind me. I have a cat who I can rely on to alert me when there's someone approaching my room, and there have been times where he's alerted me, but nobody was there. Other times he stares at the same corner of my room with an expression that tells me he can see something I can't. There's been more times than I can count where I'll be leaving a room and a cabinet will slam, or it sounds like something was moved behind me. It sounds silly, but it's odd enough for me to notice. I've mentioned it to my father, but he didn't think much of it, until earlier this morning when he woke up and went downstairs to find the basement flooded. Somehow the shower in the basement was turned on and the drain had been clogged. Neither of us used the shower in the basement. He's now fully convinced there's a ghost in this house. I don't know. If you ask me, I think it's more than the house. I get that feeling even when I'm out on a hike. I always leave food scraps and leftovers out on the tree line for the animals, and sometimes coincidentally find little treasures in the same spot, almost like I made a trade with Mother Nature. Once I left some strawberry cake leftovers out there, and the next day found a stone with pink crystal formations. Another time, I found an arrowhead carved out of stone.
I do not believe in ghosts or the paranormal. I've never experienced it. I've always been able to debunk it. I'm extremely hesitant to even admit this because I don't believe what's happening to myself. Lately, I got pretty spooked in my apartment. I don't know what it is, but there must be a rational explanation, right? Whenever I would enter the room or turn a light on, I would see a black thing scurry and hide. I thought maybe it was an animal or a bug or some dog fur, since my dogs had been shedding like crazy. But whatever I search for it, or try to focus my eyes on it, when I see it moving, it's just gone. The closest thing I could compare it to is the soot spirits from my neighbor's Totoro. This went on for a few weeks before I mentioned it to my partner. They stopped and immediately looked at me to see if I was joking. They are a big believer in the paranormal, and knows how I feel about it, so they don't often admit their experiences to me. But I came to them with this and they were shocked. They've been seeing it too. They described exactly what I was seeing. We lived in this apartment for 2 years now, and only recently started seeing this. It's freaking me out. There must be a logical explanation. I was also in the bathroom last week, and clear as day, heard my partner outside the door call to me. I called back asking what they wanted, but suddenly they were much farther away. It sounded confused. They had been in the bedroom the whole time, and hadn't heard anything, nor did they call me at all. Thus could have been the TV, even though it was closer and louder than the TV. I don't know since that experience. We have a cat toy that we bought months ago, but the sound was broken and hasn't made a single sound. All of a sudden, no movement, no touching it. It started this garbled noise, non-stop for the past week. It won't stop making this noise, and nothing even triggered it.
I was staying in a hotel in downtown Austin for a night with my girlfriend a few weeks ago. The hotel was on 4th Street, like a block and a half away from the notoriously haunted Driscoll Hotel. It must have been about 1:30 in the morning. We had just settled down and turned all the lights out when my girlfriend says, "Did you see that?" I asked her what she meant because I had my eyes closed, and she said she saw a little light fall from the ceiling, then zip across the room. She said it was like a shooting star that fell from the ceiling then took a hard turn. She made sure to emphasize that it wasn't like the light from the window, it cast its own light. I fell asleep and was woken back up a few hours later, probably about 4 a.m., by the sound of footsteps in the room. They sounded heavy and flat-footed, and they didn't sound like they were coming from upstairs or outside the room. I had heard footsteps during the day from those places by real people, and it sounded very different. These footsteps sounded like someone pacing around in the room. I didn't feel threatened, but I was a little creeped out. I was able to go back to sleep after a while. When I woke up, my girlfriend asked me if I'd gotten up during the night because she had heard someone walking around and felt like someone was up. I told her that I hadn't been up, but I heard the same thing. She also shared my feeling that it wasn't threatening, just weird. We both have rational minds and don't like to jump to conclusions, but we also have both of our fair shares of paranormal experiences. We decided initially not to say for sure it was a ghost, but that it was definitely weird. A few days later, I was talking to my brother who lives in Austin, and I told him the story and said, "I don't know if it's a ghost though. I don't know why a ghost would be there." He told me, to my surprise, that actually Austin had an axe murderer in the 1800s. The servant girl annihilator, as he's most commonly known. That sparked a deep dive, and I found out that one of the victims was actually murdered on that same lot that the hotel now stands on, and another was murdered just a block away. I told my girlfriend about this, and we both thought it was interesting, because that could explain why we didn't feel threatened by the presence if it was a ghost. The hotel doesn't have a reputation of being haunted, but her and I are both mildly sensitive to the paranormal, and are certainly open to it. So maybe the poor spirit just wanted to let us know she's still there. I don't know. We're still not 100% convinced, but it's a strange sequence of events. What do you all think? When I was pregnant, me and my kid's father stayed at his cousin's house for about a month before we moved into our apartment. It's an old farmhouse in a newly developed area of Warwick, Rhode Island. There are farms and woods in one direction and a small town on the other. We were told when we moved in that the house had been built in the mid-1800s, which to me was super interesting until my kid's father, I'll call him Brian, remarked at how the stairs seemed awfully dark and creepy for the middle of the day. And when I looked, he was right. It gave off such a sinister vibe. We slept in the living room and at night could see through the kitchen, and it was as if the stairs became a dark, uncomfortable void. When we brought this up to Brian's cousin and his wife, they proceeded to laugh and tell us stories of people being pushed down the stairs. I don't think they believed in ghosts, and the husband was an abusive drunk and drug addict, so they had enough problems, clearly. The house was chaotic. The husband and wife clearly were having some serious issues, emotionally and financially. They had a 6-year-old son who was afraid to sleep upstairs by himself because the shadows scared him. Great. After being in the house alone a couple times and seeing genuine human figures out of the corner of my eye, or even better, black dots on the floor with what looked like long spindly legs running, but when you looked at them straight on would disappear. A few times I would see a figure out of the corner of my eye, look and see one of the family members who I hadn't heard come in. I think that freaked me out the most. Because how can you explain to yourself seeing a person and sometimes nothing being there, but other times you expect it to disappear, but would in fact be a person standing there this time? So weird. Brian would say how sitting in one chair in the living room, you'd want to look over your shoulder into the doorway, as if someone was coming down a set of stairs that used to be there. This also freaked me out, considering I slept right near the doorway and often would get a feeling of someone coming toward me. One day, me and Brian were the only two in the entire house, facing one another about 2 feet away, face to face, talking loud as we usually do. Directly in the middle of us, we heard a woman's voice say, "Shh." I asked if he had said that, and he stared at me with huge eyes and asked, "No, did you?" Then we laughed it off as we were clearly talking too loudly for the inhabitants, apparently. We eventually brought this up to the family, who included a second cousin living upstairs, and they confirmed they too saw and felt things. They told us they assumed the black voids that ran on the floor were just one of their dogs, and ignored it if it wasn't. The cousin who lived upstairs said that the curtains to his closet often moved, like they were being pushed, but he chalked it up to being stoned or tired. There was no breeze. The wife told me when they first moved there, her son would see a man in a hat, but assumed it was his imagination. How could you live in a house so clearly haunted and just pass it off? The front of the house at night was avoided by basically everyone, as it was right where it felt like someone was walking by the doorframe at you in the living room. One night, I didn't feel like walking all the way around this huge house to the car, so I walked as fast as I could to the car through the front door. I heard a deep growling coming from the side of the house. They owned 3 dogs, one of which was a bull mastiff. Too freaked out to call for her, I ran in, and to my horror, all 3 dogs were in the house. Needless to say, I didn't use that entrance again. It was such an emotionally depressing house, and maybe me being pregnant, I was just more aware of everything. There were other weird things, but one of the last conversations I had with one of the roommates renting a back bedroom, it was down a long hallway at the very end, the only door in this isolated hallway. I told her about me and Brian hearing "shh" directly in the middle of us. She explained she hears the same exact thing in the hallway if she and her son were getting loud, but was sure it was the owner's young son sneaking into the hallway. I'm not so sure. When I was younger, I had an imaginary friend. We would color together, watch TV, dance and sing. My mother thought it was normal for a 5-year-old, so nothing more was made of it. When I was 10 years old, I walked in on my mother flipping through an old family photo album of black and white pictures from the 60s. She came across one that looked exactly like my imaginary friend, and I told my mother, "Hey, that's the girl I play with." My mother turned white as a ghost. She tried to ignore it until she turned a couple pages, and I pointed her out again, saying, "Look, there she is again." My mother then told me that the little girl in the photos was her sister who died in the bedroom that was now mine. I learned her name, her age, and so much more about her. She's still around 14 years later. I feel her presence a few times a week, and she enters my dreams sometimes to talk to me. When I meditate, she will make an effort to communicate with me as well. I own some of her things from when she was alive. A watch, her library card, a hair bow, her kindergarten diploma, and a little doll. I adore her and hope she sticks around until my end comes too. So I've lived in my current house for just shy of 8 years. It was a house I moved to just after my divorce, and so I tried to make it as happy of a place as possible after a frankly horrible marriage. So I noticed a few things within the first month. I didn't use the spare room apart from junk storage, so the door was always closed. When standing at the kitchen door having a cigarette, you'd hear footsteps from the spare room above. I'm very interested in the paranormal due to an experience as a child. I used to knock on the wall in the kitchen, only to have it replicated from the floor above. The room itself wasn't somewhere I'd like to be. It felt unwelcoming. I also used to get the immediate smell of stale cigarettes on the landing. Now, a lot point out I smoke in the kitchen, but that's always with the back door open. I never smoke indoors. You'd walk up the stairs into the stench, then without warning it would just go. More than once I've seen a shadow leaning over the banisters, looking down the staircase at me. Never managed to catch it on camera, sadly. Perhaps the one that scared me the most was the woman who appeared in my bedroom. I was coming out of the shower, walked into my room to see her standing beside the window. The first thing I noticed was how she was dressed in a long button-up 70s style dress and a pinafore apron. She looked me dead in the eyes for what seemed like an eternity, probably only a second or two, then vanished. Now, fast forward a few years, and my current partner had a friend who called over. She was very into pagan stuff and had a knack for sensing ghosts. I asked if she'd take a walk around to see if she could feel anything in my house. I stress, I hadn't told her of what I experienced. She felt 3 people in the house. One, an older lady who hadn't died in the house, but had lived there. Another was a younger man who had died in the spare room. The third, she said, was in the attic, but she couldn't get a reading from it. Finally, I did a little digging. I found that while the house wasn't very old, there had been a woman who was born in it, lived in it all her life, and died in the mid-1980s of lung cancer. Her grandson had lived there after her, but he died a few years later of a drug overdose. As I move on to pastures new with my soon-to-be new wife, I'm reminded of everything that went on here. The lights going on and off, the knocks, the smells of cigarettes, door handles rattling, and electrical equipment coming on randomly. And of course, the old woman showing herself in my bedroom. It frightened me, but I slowly learned to live with it. Who knows? I might be reporting on another experience in my new home. I've been living in the same house with my father for most of my life. When I was young, I had scary things I saw in my bedroom at night. Mainly a cloaked man who resembled death would float out of the wall on one side of my room and go through the opposite side. It would be a nightly occurrence to the point where I knew it would happen, and I would hide under my covers, sweating while knowing what was happening around me. It used to be a joke I slept in a cocoon. I wouldn't just experience things like this at my house, it would be at others as well. Once I was about 8 or 9 and had a sleepover at my cousin's place. I remember waking up in the middle of the night, covers wrapped around my head so just my eyes and nose were visible. I noticed a pair of legs standing in front of my face. I felt immediate terror and couldn't bear to look up. I just pretended to be asleep and never spoke of it again. At my grandparents' house, I'd sleep over, again about 9 years old, and would constantly have experiences of hearing footsteps coming to my door and then continuing down past my door. My door would be open so I could see no one was there. I one time woke up and was face to face with a dog, but quickly wrapped the sheets back over my face and prayed it would go away. Anyways, all these experiences and more I had put off to being young, tired, or just made up in my head because ghosts aren't real. Until last night, which confirms all my experiences. Well, the other night, I was sitting in my room reading with my dog on my bed as I usually do. It was about 12:30 a.m. I then had heard a light thud at my door, and when I had looked up, my shower towel that hangs on the back of my door started swaying slightly. It then stopped for a second or two and began swaying a bit more aggressively. At this point, fear and terror took over, and I yelled out, "Spirit, You're not welcome here." At that point, I had said this, and the towel was thrown off the hooks and on the back of my door, scaring both me and my dog. Since this has happened, it's validated that the spirit is real, and I've been trying to find answers, but I don't really know where to look. Everyone I've spoken to doesn't seem to believe me, or has some other far-fetched explanation. This whole thing sounds like a joke and stupid, but I have no explanation as to why or how this happened. I should also add that there is no vent near my towel. Windows are closed as it's winter and very cold. My door was closed, so nothing external from the room could have affected it. I just feel alone and terrified every night. Just needed somewhere to vent and maybe connect to others whose experiences might be similar. I woke up yesterday night, soaked in sweat from the heater I'd set up in my bedroom, and went into the bathroom. I stuck my face under the water in the sink and heard an odd tapping noise coming from behind the mirror, thinking it was a mouse chilling in the walls, as I don't live in the best place, and the mice ought to be paying rent at this point. I didn't think much of it and dried my face off on a hand towel going back to bed. Whether it was the noise behind the mirror or just the feeling like I was being watched after that, I couldn't sleep. Either way, I assumed it was the mirror and went to the mirror to further investigate. After thoroughly inspecting the mirror itself, I pressed my ear to the wall and heard the wildest noise. Faint whispering. I couldn't make out a single word of it, but it was incredibly distinctive. Sounded just garbled, like the person who was talking's mouth was full of spit. I stepped back and rightly freaked out, banging on the wall next to the mirror and asking who was in there. In response, however, much to my surprise, I got several other bangs back, the mirror shaking with the force of them. In turn, I ran out of the bathroom and into the living room, grabbing my phone and wallet before hearing another series of knocks on the wall in the living room and one clear muffled yell of a sentence, "Please stop." I regretfully nearly shit my pants and yelled at it to leave me alone, running out the front door and down the sidewalk over to my neighbor's house, banging on his door and telling him that I had found another spider's nest under my bed, which has happened before, and he let me in, letting me sleep on his couch. I've never been more scared in my life, and I'm really not sure what to do now. Selling the house and living at my friend's house, who I'm staying with now, until I find a new place is the current plan, but I'm not really sure. I feel like an idiot and a coward running from whatever happened, and assuming it was some kind of inhuman entity harassing me for the hell of it. But I don't know what could have caused something that felt so real. I would still have to go back and pack up my stuff if I did go, and I've lived in that house comfortably for 2 weeks with no problems like this. So I'm not sure if I'm ready to leave that all behind because of one little incident like this that could have just been some sort of surreal nightmare.